Hello and welcome to Turkey Abroad. My name is Nicholas Morgan and I'm an editor at Alval News. And today my guest is Blaise Misztal. He is a fellow at the Hudson Institute where he focuses on the Middle East. Blaise, pleasure to have you with me.
Good to be with you, Nicholas.
My first question has to do with the fact that we are getting very close to the end of the presidential race here in the US. And the possibility that Joe Biden could be elected to replace Trump is frankly very real right now. And I want to ask you how this could be seen for Turkey, considering Biden has been pretty outspoken on his feelings related to withdrawing from Syria back in October last year, or Nagorno-Karabakh recently, even the issue of Hagia Sophia. And he's openly called President Erdogan in Turkey an autocrat. So to you, how concerning do you think a Biden presidency could be to Ankara?
Well, certainly if we listen to the official statements or statements made by officials in Ankara, there's no love lost for Joe Biden and some of the things that he has had to say about Turkey and President Erdogan specifically. What that would actually translate into in terms of policy on either side, I think is a lot less obvious. My personal view is that the US-Turkey relationship is really bounded in some ways, structurally, strategically, I'd say even intellectually, at least in Washington. And so while I do think that the way that a President Biden would relate with President Erdogan would be significantly different than what we've seen between the current occupant of the White House, President Trump, and President Erdogan. I don't think you'd actually get a significant change in US policy. And I say that noting that I don't think US policy on Turkey has really been very different across the last several administrations, which is to say that regardless of what sort of the occupant of the White House feels about Turkey, the relationship has largely, it has been perturbed and it has reached low points, but there's never really been a major willingness by the United States to break off ties or do anything drastic, what it would view as drastic in order to break from Turkey or try to change Turkish behavior. Obviously, Turks see it differently, but at least from the US perspective, perhaps the staunchest and strongest action against Turkey has actually come under President Trump in the form of his sanctions to get Pastor Andrew Brunson released and threats to destroy the Turkish economy. But under President Obama, we saw a perhaps growing dislike of President Erdogan, but no significant actions really to change the nature of the relationship, continued expressions of the hope for a fruitful partnership. Under President Trump, on and off, that has continued. I see a President Biden perhaps more willing to speak out, so perhaps rhetorically we'd have a change with him calling out Turkish behavior. But I don't see the United States having really figured out this conundrum of what do we want from Turkey? Are we willing to leave Turkey behind and risk it going to Russia? Or do we want to bring Turkey back into the fold of NATO? So that intellectual discussion that we're all having as Turkey analysts, I don't see any sign of there being a decision made within the US government, and certainly not in any statements that Vice President Biden has made thus far on what his policy would be. Strategically, I just don't think that the US is all that interested in interfering, engaging in the Middle East writ large in order to push back on Turkish behavior. Vice President Biden might have been supportive of U.S. military engagement with Syrian Democratic Forces. As a candidate, he might complain about President Trump's withdrawal of forces from there. But I find it hard to imagine that if he were to be elected president, he'd recommit a new larger American contingent to go back into Syria and therefore risk what would now be a confrontation with Turkish forces and Turkish-backed forces that are already there. I don't see him, sending U.S. naval forces to confront Turkish vessels in the Eastern Mediterranean on behalf of Greece or other allies. I don't see him sending U.S. forces to engage in any way in the fighting in Nagorno-Karabakh, right? So strategically, the U.S., both in its, call it war weariness from endless wars and general bipartisan pivot to China, is much less strategically interested in doing anything in the Middle East, and therefore that is part of the vacuum that Turkey is exploiting and will continue to exploit regardless of who is president. And just structurally, I think the United States, because of the history of the relationship with Turkey, the fact that Turkey is in NATO, there are no sort of clear mechanisms for even thinking about sanctioning or expelling Turkey from NATO, the existing military relationships, and the continued desire to have an ally in this extremely important geopolitical position, and continued threats from Russia, Iran, and other places. Structurally, I think the United States is not ready to move against Turkey in any significant way. So we might have rhetorical differences, we might have greater shows of animosity rather than amity and friendliness at the top. But when it comes to the nitty-gritty of US policy, I'm not sure we're going to see significant differences.
You mentioned a lot of these institutional and structural ties between the United States and Turkey, which I think has generally remained consistent, as you also mentioned, through administrations that's caused a level of prioritization for maintaining that kind of relationship for U.S. presidents, even if they might have had some misgivings about Erdogan. But it does also seem that compared to at least when Biden was last in Washington, when he was vice president, compared to now, some of the environment has changed a bit, where Congress is seemingly very cold towards Turkey right now, and they're demanding action through Costa over the S-400 purchase. And then, of course, Erdogan got a very chilly reception when he came to D.C. last November, and he spoke when he had Trump mediate between him and some Republican senators. There is maybe some discomfort in other areas such as the Pentagon over the F-35 purchase. So do you think that these changed ideas and feelings of Congress and other aspects of the U.S. government bureaucracy related to foreign policy could influence Biden to be more forward in dealing with Turkey? Or do you think that these strategic ties will ultimately trump those concerns?
I think there's certainly room to move the needle, and especially on the congressional side. As you noted, there's perhaps few international leaders that are as unpopular on Capitol Hill as President Erdogan. But in many ways, I think there's a logic that plays out between the two ends of Pennsylvania Avenue regarding sort of constitutional powers and foreign policy, where it seems like congressional dislike and congressional imposition tends to create the opposite reaction in the White House. I'm thinking here of big push by Congress in sort of the late 2000s, early 2010s to sanction Iran during the Obama administration. Sanctions that the administration continually tried to not impose, skirt, use as minimally as possible, and sort of this congressional desire to try to create a good cop, bad cop rapport between the White House and Congress, and President Obama's continued refusal to play that role. It really his disdain for Congress trying to force his hand. I think independent of strategic and policy thinking, a lot of those same dynamics apply to the CATSA situation, and why we haven't seen an application of those sanctions to Turkey for the purchase of the S-400. Perhaps that would change with President Biden. Perhaps he'd be more willing to apply those. Perhaps he'd think the S-400 issue more important than President Trump has thus far deemed it. But I think it's also possible that the more Congress is activist on the Turkey issue, the more resistance it would actually meet from the executive branch, and it could be counterproductive. There's also the question of whether Congress will actually remain activist on Turkey. I think if the sort of expectation is that we're going to have a bit of a further leftward swing, as we saw in the 2018 primaries in the House. Certainly we've seen, for example, Chairman Engel has just lost his primary from the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He was one of the I don't want to say champions of anti-Turkishness, but he was certainly one of the leading voices concerned about Turkey's direction under Erdogan. We'll have to see what happens in the Senate, but we could have a Congress that is less interested in foreign affairs and less concerned about what's happening in Turkey. So it's not clear to me yet what the congressional angle will be and whether it'll actually impact Turkey policy. I think when it comes to the executive branch and the agencies, then certainly personnel does matter. I don't want to say personnel is policy, but personnel has a large impact on policy. And as I've written in War on the Rocks earlier this year, I think that the fact that we do have sort of a less confrontational policy with Turkey than some might like is largely down to the fact that we have people, especially in the State Department, in senior positions, who continue to see Turkey as a potential future partner again, and think that the challenges the United States faces in the region, especially when it comes to countering Iranian influence, are far graver than any disagreements that it has with Turkey right now, and keeping an eye on the Iranian threat should push us back towards trying to be more cooperative with Turkey. Will those people stay? Will they be replaced by people who have a different opinion of Turkey? It's impossible to tell at this point. But again, I go back to the fact that I think there are structural and strategic limitations that even if you had leaders in the State Department and the Department of Defense who were less desirous of a positive relationship with Turkey, they would find their moves limited in terms of what they could do to change that relationship.
I was reading, rereading not too long ago, an article in The Atlantic from 2016 where the editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg spoke to then Vice President Biden about his philosophy on foreign policy, and he spoke in ways that made it sound, that resonated like realpolitik, essentially. And you know, I think the big question for many naturally comes down to what exactly U.S. interests are still related to Turkey. You mentioned, for instance, the potential of using Turkey as part of a containment circle, like when it comes to Iran. But in previous episodes, I spoke to other experts who suggested that Turkey has no interest itself in really being part of containing Iran, because they have a very cordial, non-confrontational relationship at the moment, and they see other countries in the region, such as Israel, Egypt, or the rest of the Gulf countries, as a threat more so than one another. And then, of course, I think that it also involves Russia to an extent, where Turkey has a very testy at times, but cooperative relationship with Russia in areas they have a shared interest. So for the U.S., what would these kind of hard power or realpolitik sort of issues be with Turkey still?
Yeah, I think I first of all question to the extent to which a President Biden would be a hardcore realist. I think it's actually really hard to get a finger on what exactly his worldview is going to be, and I say that for a variety of reasons. I think sort of on the one hand, you get senses of that. You mentioned the interview in the Atlantic. There was his advocacy during the Obama administration for dealing with Afghanistan purely as a counter-terrorist exercise and sort of not following the counterinsurgency route and sort of pulling out most forces. So there's definitely that flavor to him. You could say that his previous statements about breaking up Iraq could also fall into that category. But I don't think that's the face that Biden really puts forward, at least certainly in this campaign. Both I think as casting himself as an old foreign policy hand. He's more of a throwback to not necessarily the Cold War years, but the post-Cold War years, and I think more to liberal internationalism, and certainly in his discussions of the way the U.S. should be handling the COVID response and relying on international cooperation, how we should be working with our partners, and how we need to rebuild their faith in us and rebuild multilateral institutions. That's not realist speak in any way. At the same time, if you look at some of his foreign policy suggestions, he's talked about almost liberal sounding ideas like the need he'd like to convene all the democracies of the world and have sort of this more values-based approach. He's spoken out against Erdogan as an autocrat. He's called out Trump for supporting Sisi in Egypt and said U.S. aid shouldn't continue because of the violations of human rights and democracy there. At the same time, his advisors like Jake Sullivan have really been writing things that try to put the brakes on a more realist, stark view of the world, saying, well, maybe there are still areas where we can cooperate with China. We shouldn't just think of them as a competitor or an adversary. So I'm not sure that he really is or would be a realist in the way that he would govern. So I'd take issue with that. I do think that he would severely question, though, continued U.S. interests in the Middle East. I think there's obviously the issue of Israel, where I think he is perhaps further to the right than the Democratic base, and he probably would want to continue that partnership, even when many question it on the left. I think there's sort of a continued interest in ensuring that there's a free flow of oil from the Middle East. But beyond that, I'm not sure that there would be a lot of interest there. Perhaps continued counterterrorism missions. But what we've seen articulated from Vice President Biden is that he would return to at least some form of the JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran. That he would also end endless wars. He has spoken rather disfavorably of Egypt, of Saudi Arabia, so there might be a rethinking of U.S. partnerships with some of these countries, which are also some of the regional adversaries of Turkey. So there could be actually an even greater of a strategic vacuum opening in the Middle East that would give Turkey further ability to maneuver in the region. I think the one place where there might be an impact on Turkey is Biden's, I think, desire to rebuild ties with Europe and perhaps strengthen strategic cooperation. I'm not sure to what extent that would actually pan out. Europe is a parlous concept. There's not a lot of strategic coherence between EU members. But if President Biden were able to marshal together the European countries into more of a shared transatlantic strategy, especially if it were to be based on values and democracy, then you could see some greater pushback coming from Europe against Turkey. Because I think one of the things that Turkey has been able to do thus far is to keep Europe divided, especially through its ability to blackmail blackmail Germany specifically. Macron and France are becoming increasingly, I think, muscular towards Turkey. And if President Biden were able to rally other European countries around that vision, then perhaps that would be one place where the U.S. could lead some sort of pushback against Turkey. But otherwise, I'm not really seeing a lot of U.S. involvement in the Middle East. Different, sort of more of the same as we have under President Trump, perhaps, but not any major differences, and certainly not any new major involvements under President Biden.
No, almost similarly to President Trump, Joe Biden has even said that he has the ability to deal with Erdogan because he has something of a personal relationship with him based on the amount of time that he says that they spent together during the Obama years. But at the same time, during the Obama years, we did end up seeing the steady decline begin of the U.S.-Turkey relationship. And at this point, Turkey does not feel as if it can trust the United States in a lot of ways. They feel abandoned, according to some observers, by the U.S. But of course, they say that that was also a long time coming, since at least the end of the Cold War. And the United States, as you also mentioned, is becoming much less engaged in Middle East affairs. So I guess what I would like to ask you next is whether you think that a Biden administration would reflect on this new set of priorities and realities and learn the lessons maybe of the Obama years.
Yeah, so I do think the question of what relations between a President Biden and a President Erdogan would look like would probably be the most interesting and perhaps different aspect. President Erdogan, we know, gets not only a warm reception from President Trump in the White House, but they speak quite often on the phone, and often those phone conversations lead to significant changes in U.S. policy, as we saw in October 2018, when it was right after a call with Erdogan that President Trump announced that he was withdrawing, or at least drawing down the number of U.S. forces in Syria. And so that direct connection between the two leaders is an important part of the relationship, and in fact is perhaps the largest part of the U.S.-Turkey relationship right now. And that's actually not true just of Trump. It was true under President Obama for a long time as well. President Obama and President Erdogan also spoke on the phone frequently, at least until there began a deterioration following, especially the Gezi protests and then disagreements over Syria policy. And I think by 2014, in fact, a lot of those conversations stopped and were led by Vice President Biden instead. But they still continued at a fairly high level. And I think it would be interesting to see whether the strong distaste that Turkish officials have expressed towards Biden, given his comments specifically in the New York Times interview from January 2020, January of this year, where he called Erdogan an autocrat and suggested supporting the opposition, whether that pushback will continue and whether there'll be a refusal, to deal with Biden. There's a lot of indignancy and hurt pride expressed on the Turkish side over those comments. But at the same time, I think that for a lot of both personal reasons and policy reasons, Erdogan certainly likes having the access to the White House and likes controlling the relationship and leading it at that high level. It could also be the case that President Biden would choose not to have that relationship. That might be a lesson that he learned and took from the Obama presidency. And I think that would actually perhaps be the healthiest thing he could do, is try to rebuild regular working bureaucratic diplomatic relations with Turkey, and take things out of this interpersonal highest level dialogue that has upended U.S. policy, at least under the current administration.
In a previous conversation I had on Turkey Abroad, it was with Dr. Michael Rubin over at AEI, and he spoke about how U.S. policy particularly at the State Department, and at times deals with a Turkey that they want rather than a Turkey that they have. And of course, today, Turkey under Erdogan is much more assertive in its unilateral approach to regional matters, and it's rankled quite a number of other countries, including a number of US allies, against it. And I guess what I would like to ask you from there is why is it ultimately that you think that the U.S. will or does struggle to deal with this new assertive Turkey, short of of course, we have the strategic relationship, we have the connections within NATO, but is that enough to explain why the U.S. has been slow to really get its arms around this new assertive Turkey?
Yeah, look, breaking up is hard to do, especially with a partner that has or could have the pivotal role that Turkey has. And I think especially because sort of our strategic framework right now is one of great power competition, and for better or worse. And I don't think it's necessarily the most exact or constructive way to look at things. But it's sort of like a game of Risk where we sort of count, the influence, how many guys our adversaries, our competitors have on the board, and how many we have. And I think there's sort of this concern in U.S., especially defense circles, of losing Turkey, or of Russia gaining Turkey, I guess would be the other way to put it. And this idea that pushback by the United States is going to lead to Erdogan becoming a sort of a Russian puppet. And certainly the S-400 leads to that conclusion, and closer ties with Russia leads to that conclusion. I think it's really hard from a U.S. policymaker point of view to see why Russia can contribute to the killing of Turkish troops in Syria like they did in February, why they can come to blows repeatedly like they did when Turkey shot down a Russian jet, and yet they're able to have good relations. In fact, you have Erdogan apologizing to Putin for the shooting down of the jet, and yet the U.S. and Turkey have seemingly much less significant issues but can't find their way through them, which I think leads to the conclusion that therefore Ankara must be moving towards Moscow. So as long as it's sort of that binary, either Ankara is with us or they're against us, I think it's going to be very hard for us to cut our losses. I think there's also in the U.S. government and more broadly in parts of the Turkey community, a focus purely on these external actions of Turkey, and focus on sort of these international crises, and often those aren't connected to sort of the domestic political analysis as well. And I think when viewed that way, you sort of hope that, well, maybe we can find areas of cooperation, maybe we can find ways to negotiate with Turkey on the assumption that these are all sort of discrete international actions that it's taking for whatever strategic reasons, and we can find ways to offer it incentives or maybe push back in some small instances through sanctions or other means that will change its calculation, rather than seeing them as what they are, which is, I think, part of a bigger political project that is, it all stems from Erdogan's desire to have power and use that power to transform Turkey both from within and as well as its place in the world. And I think the refusal to see that bigger picture also sort of limits our understanding of what's happening with Turkey, and sort of makes us think that what we call in DC a transactional relationship, where we can continue to at least find bits here and bits there that we can work out together, is possible, when I think we're well past that stage at this point.
Blaise Misztal, thank you very much for your time today. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I do hope that you can join us again sometime soon here on Turkey Abroad.
Thanks for having me on. It was great to talk to you.
My name is Nicholas Morgan, and this is Turkey Abroad.